I'm Tim, welcome to Watch You Want, and thanks for logging on. Well, Wednesday is the Watchmaker's Workshop, so I brought my watchmaker.
Tim, how you doing?
Doing well. Michael's here to answer all of your questions. Now, we're myth busting today. Fun format, and it actually works well with wristwatches because there is so much mythology surrounding these things and the industry. But before we launch, I wanted to talk about two things, Mike, and maybe add a third. I had a question from a client about the caliber. It's a modular Audemars Piguet chronograph in a Jules Audemars chronograph 25859.
Yeah, the in-house movement, which they stopped using the JLC base and they went to their own in-house movement. Personally, I like the movement. The JLC was a fantastic movement. That's just, I serviced one today. I have pictures of it up on Instagram. Fantastic movement to service. The in-house movement is very well done, very nice finish on it. We really don't see a lot of problems with it. If it has one weak point that I've seen is the date drive wheel. It's different. It's not the same kind of date drive wheel system that a 7750 has. It's a multiple stacked layer system, and I've seen it kind of hang up and be weak. We replaced a couple of them. But other than that, they use the same module chronograph, has a DD module on top of it. The service on them, it's straightforward service. We get very good results every time we service one. We get very good amplitude out of them. One of the things we see, and we've talked about this a lot of times with the APs, a lot of times for whatever reason, people don't like to use the chronographs.
Yes.
And so if you're thinking about buying one of those watches, have it checked with the chronograph on and chronograph off and see exactly what your amplitude readings are. And if you have a split of more than 50 degrees, then they probably haven't run the chronograph enough and the lubricants just dried out.
So what happened was we had a client who reached out to us. He's actually buying a Jules Audemars chronograph from a friend, and he wanted our opinion of the caliber in the watch. Is it reliable? Is it robust? How does it compare to the old JLC 889 with the same chronograph module? We like it. Again, like Mike says, though, you just want to do your homework because as robust as the movement is, it's a modular chrono, and people tend not to run the chrono, so it can get superannuated and aged in advance of the rest of the movement.
They dry up. They just basically, the lubricants dry up, and it's not in the vertical clutch so much, it's in the chronograph wheels themselves. And I don't know if I've seen it more in AP than other brands, and I don't know if that's because of the lubricants. They might have been using D5 for the lubricant, which was a blend. It's synthetic and mineral blend, and half of it evaporates and it just leaves a sticky residue behind. I'm not sure if that's the reason why. When we service them, we use all full synthetic. But I see them more in AP than anything else as far as the chronograph amplitude dropping with chronographs on. So just have the watch checked out really well for that. And if there's a problem, it's not a problem servicing that movement at all.
And like Mike said, you want to make sure that when you turn the chronograph on, the watch doesn't lose inordinate amounts of amplitude. What would you say is inordinate? More than 30 degrees?
Anything on that watch, anything more than 50.
More than 50?
Yeah, anything more than 50. If you're running in the high 280s, if you turn a chronograph on and it drops below 240 or around below 250, then you can start being concerned. Below 240, then yeah, you're going to have a problem. And where you have the problem is on power reserve. If you're planning on running that chronograph a lot, you're going to have a power reserve problem, and it's just not going to have the same life that it would. One thing the in-house AP movements do have that are really nice, the finish on them is a lot nicer than what the JLC movements had. And they have, I believe it's a 24 karat oscillating weights, it's just, or 28 karat. It's a very nice finish on the movement itself. It's just a very dressy movement, and that's why they went to the display back on it. Yeah,
it's a pretty movement. Like Mike said, it has the coats of arms of Audemars and Piguet families, beautifully done, great bridge work, beautiful polished screws. JLC generally did blued screws. So a nice movement to look at and a great movement to use. Just make sure you do your homework when you buy it. So next question we had that came up was just in terms of what is our status as an Omega certified service center with a parts account? Because we had a gentleman who emailed me and he got very touchy, and I think he was confusing us with a depot because he's claiming there's only 3 Omega service centers in the country, and clearly there's a middle ground between Swatch itself and just a shop.
We are not Swatch. But we do have Omega certifications here. Both myself and one other watchmaker, we both have the OWME certification, and we're probably one of the only. I'm probably quite confident in saying we're the only shop in the country that has 2 OWME certified watchmakers on staff. What that does is we pass. That's the highest level right now that Omega will certify for in the U.S. It covers coaxial, it covers modular chronographs, it covers pretty much the full line. Plus we have the water test equipment for the full line, for the dive watches, everything else. I think we could test up to 1,000 meters, 100. Yeah, we don't do it that often because we don't have a calling for it. But we have the capability of it, and to be able to get certified to the highest level with Omega, you have to have the equipment before they'll sell you the parts. So they'll sell you at different levels. You could be a level 3 watchmaker, and they'll sell you parts, up to the Speedmaster. Once you start going for the higher levels and the deeper watches, you need the special test equipment. Then once you have it, you prove you have it. You literally have to send in a picture of the equipment. Then they approve you for it. So we don't do Omega warranty work if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But we do Omega work with all factory Omega parts and the Omega backing. We have the training. We have all the documentation. We use all the training manuals straight from Omega. We fix everything in guidelines with Omega.
And of course the correct parts, which is a big deal, including on vintage watches in some cases.
Yeah, a lot of vintage stuff. Omega is very good as far as supplying vintage watches, vintage pieces for watches. But however, that said, we talked about this a little bit last week, the price of vintage watch parts, case parts, everything else, a lot of times that along with the service will greatly exceed the value of the watch. That doesn't mean you can't get a crystal for the old the old Seamasters, the old dive watches with the monocoque cases. Yeah, that stuff's still available. So are the crowns, all that stuff, all the movement parts are still available, but they're getting very, very expensive, especially the movement parts, reversing wheels, stuff like that. And the biggest problem we see when it comes to doing service on vintage Omegas, because that watch is 30, 40 years old, so many people have been into it, so we have to fix what other people have, basically screwed up. And that goes from replacing screws. If you can't polish that, the scratches out, we have to replace the screws because we have to make that watch as nice as possible, and that's what we try to do.
So basically, we have a high degree of certification as a vetted by Swatch Group US Omega Service Center. We are not a depot, so if you're confusing us with Secaucus, sorry.
No.
We didn't mean that. But in terms of warranty, also know that we have a 90-day warranty for watches we sell on our website. Our warranties on Omega services are considerably in advance of that.
Yeah, anything we do a full service on is not treated the same as a watch that we buy and sell. We do offer extended warranties on watches. We do any watch we service prior to sale. We usually offer an extended warranty on that as well. And we're going to be doing some changes in our warranty over the next few months. I know that too. We're going to be extending our warranty as well, just because we've had such good success in the watches that we do sell.
So, Mythbusters is the theme tonight, and of course, because we're busting myths, we're starting with the biggest block out there. So we're going to move out into the testing zone and take on Rolex. So I'm going to tackle this first topic because this is the linchpin of Rolex advertising. Geneva, please don't get angry with me, but it takes a year to make a Rolex. Okay, no, but by any conventional measurement of manufacturing, it does not take a year to make a Rolex. You may be able to say that because Rolex is a large industrial concern and parts are essentially built in a conveyor process, starting with the ore. Rolex has a foundry. From there, pieces go to stamping. From there, they go to final machining and finishing. You could conceivably have something sitting in a hopper or an inventory shelf for a year before it becomes mated to a watch. So by that measurement, maybe, but then if it takes a year to make a Rolex, what does it take, 5 to make a Patek Philippe?
Well, let me ask you about that too. Are they, when they say a year to make a Rolex, could they possibly be talking about the hours involved, where it takes 2,080 hours to go from raw material to finished watch? And even though,
they're deliberately vague. Now, they don't qualify that claim in any way. For years, Rolls-Royce described its horsepower output as adequate. So you could use your imagination. Likewise, you could use your imagination to figure out how a Rolex takes a year to make, but with industrialized manufacture of components. And I mean, Mike, you could take a Rolex broken down to the individual components and build it up in what, 2 hours, 3 hours? Yeah. I mean, it does not take a year to make a Rolex. Not when it takes, a third of a year to build a completely finished Vacheron Constantin chronograph with their caliber 1141 based on the Lemania Bausch that they have to finish from a bare kit. There's no way it takes a year to make a Rolex. Not by any acceptable convention that we would describe as making.
Well, even when you go back to early watchmaking, when you look at Patek or other brands, when they started the mass produced, they had one person that did nothing but make a certain lever.
Yeah.
And that was what he did. He cut this lever. This is all he did. He became a professional at cutting this lever, perfectionist at it. That's what he did. The guy sitting next to him made a spring.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what they did. Then it actually, all the parts went to the watchmaker, who actually did the assembly of the watch with the adjustment and the final finish.
Yeah. The thing I would say about a Rolex watch is because it's so highly automated with conveyors and roboticized inventory devices actually bringing parts to the centralized watchmaking hubs, the little desks. There are people building the watches. They're not completely machine made. But when you consider with automation how quickly a trained Rolex watchmaker could build up a watch, I would say the actual time to make the Rolex is probably more like 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah, because the other thing, I haven't been in the Rolex factory, but when I went to the Hublot factory, even when it comes to setting jewels, they had a machine that it spilled the jewels out on a black piece of paper, and it took a picture of them, and then it automatically identified which ones were the right side up and which ones were the right side down, and it picked those jewels up and automatically placed them in the bridges. So I have to think, and that was on a low production. So on something with a higher production like Rolex, I would have to think they have the same equipment, that they didn't design the equipment themselves.
Yeah. Hublot, for reference, is making about 25,000 watches a year. It might seem like more with all the limited editions, but again, consider the amount of industrialization on Hublot's scale, making 25,000 watches a year. Now extrapolate Rolex 800,000 to 1 million a year.
Yeah.
Again, if it's taking a year to make a Rolex, there's a time loop somewhere in there, like DC Comics style time loop. I'm talking about you, Booster Gold. So now moving forward, Rolex warranties, there is this rumor that will not die that's been on the internet for the last, I'd say, 2 months, to the effect that Rolex warranties are now non-transferable. We have, through Govberg, which is an authorized dealer of Rolex, we have debunked this.
What Rolex won't do, Rolex will not warranty anything from a third party. So if they won't gray market, anything like that, Rolex will not honor the warranty. You have to go through an AD. And you cannot, again, if you buy the watch, it's very delicate how you treat Rolex and how Rolex handles their warranties, because I'm being very delicate how I answer the question as well. Because Rolex is one of the brands that you just have to be very careful with. If you buy a Rolex from us, we'll do the warranty work. That's pretty much how we look at it.
Yeah.
If the watch is under warranty, you're better off buying that watch through an AD. Just because to keep that warranty, because they're very strict on gray market and everything else, and secondhand.
Yeah, so it's important to note that we have seen a pattern emerging in the mainstream of watchmaking, so by that I mean Omega and Rolex, of dealers asking specifically for a bill of sale or a receipt.
Yeah, they want to see a bill of sale.
So it could be conceivable that if you bought a Rolex and gave it to someone else and the warranty card were not filled in that person's name, that without the bill of sale or receipt, the warranty might not be transferable. And this is something we've seen with Omega too.
Omega especially. Omega did it because of the whole Costco. And I can't remember how many years ago it was. Might have been 10 years ago now.
It raged for about a decade.
Yeah, the whole Costco thing where they were buying watches overseas and importing the watches, and Costco was selling the watches. And Omega does not have to grant the warranty, because that watch was bought and sold, and it's not the original owner. And Costco ended up being the original owner. And I haven't read the results of that. And like I said, it's probably 10 years. The Supreme Court came out with
10 years from the time that started. You want to look it up online?
You can.
It's Swatch Group versus Costco, and it was a landmark. Basically, it was all about gray marketeering, trans-shipping, and ultimately whether a brand, Swatch in this case, retained control over its trademarks in every subsequent sale. It was kind of technical. Costco sort of came out ahead, but the shakeout for consumer is that Omega is increasingly strict, the entire Swatch Group, about asking for a bill of sale or a receipt, and that goes for Rolex as well.
Yeah, again, Omega has a very good warranty. They have a long warranty, but they're also, it's really non-transferable though, as far as their warranty without a bill of sale.
Yeah, so keep all your records, even if you're just giving the watch as a gift, perhaps especially if you're giving the watch as a gift. Now, continuing to bust our myths or confirm, some things are true, we have a myth that will not die, and it has some grounding in truth, but Rolex prices increase yearly. We're going to qualify this one as false with some clarification. Mike, how do Rolex prices increase?
Rolex prices, you see Rolex prices increase. It's number one, it goes by market. Number two, it goes by the strength of the Swiss franc, and it also goes by the price of the precious metal that's used to construct the watches.
Yeah.
You know, so they take a lot of things into variance as far as the Rolex pricing.
And this is important to note. They will adjust prices regionally. Like for instance, we had Brexit. You know, it hasn't happened yet, but it's on the way. The pound fell. As the pound fell, all of a sudden, if you looked at Rolex inventory that was already in England, if you were on the continent or you were abroad elsewhere, suddenly it becomes very cheap to buy a Rolex in England and ship it abroad using a foreign currency. So Rolex moved rapidly to adjust prices to prevent trans-shipping. So that's one case of Rolex adjusting prices regionally. And the idea that they increase prices every year, that's also not true. It sometimes seems that way, but there is an old saw that Rolex increases prices by 10% every year. If you look at the average trend, in some cases, for some models, that's true, but like Mike says, it also, in some cases, varies per the material composition of the watch. Precious metal is going to change more than steel when they change, which is not yearly and not globally.
Yeah, they'll come with a price increase for all gold models. They'll come with a price increase for all steel models. They'll do complications. You know, so they do it in sections. It's not an across-the-board price increase. You're not going to be a price decrease, but it's not going to be an across-the-board price increase when it comes to Rolex.
Now, here's something else we should throw out there. I don't have it as part of tonight's program, but I think it should be added because there are always questions about gray market watches, and there is another bromide that just won't die, which is that if you buy a watch outside authorized dealer channels, not so much the manufacturer won't honor a warranty, that's probably going to happen, warranty denial, but that they won't service the watch, period.
They'll service the watch. They will service the watch. They don't care about that. If they can charge you for it, they're going to charge you for it. One of the things, and it's a big myth, is factory service is not, comparable to what they're doing. It's really not as expensive as you think it is either. And sometimes we do it here. We send watches in for factory service, so we get that paperwork saying this watch came from the factory with a factory warranty, and they cover that warranty.
Yeah, and the marginal increase in the value of the watch may exceed the service. I'll give you a great example of what it costs to service a really complicated watch. We'll do wrist checks in a moment, but this is the one I'm not wearing. It is mine. It's a Jaeger-LeCoultre Platinum Grande Memovox. It's an alarm, it's a perpetual calendar, it's entirely of platinum, all the case screws are platinum, the through fitting for the pusher adjuster is platinum. I sent this watch into the factory, and not only did it need a full service, but it also needed a couple of parts. And I paid about $1,500 to service this watch, which has layer upon layer of complexity and richness. If you ask a lot of people what would it cost to service this watch, they'll start guessing $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Not the case. And I gotta say, my Amvox chronograph that I'm wearing, which has specialized case seals, specialized parts, dual barrel, vertical clutch, column wheel, in-house chronograph caliber, I paid $910 to service that one.
Yeah, again, very reasonable. You're getting all factory parts. And the other thing, we talk about this every week, if you send a watch in for factory service, they upgrade, because we're constantly making changes in the production, and they see over time you have a movement that's been out 10, 15, 20 years. They know what parts wear out more than others, so they're automatically upgrading everything to the newest versions. So it's a lot of times factory service is the best route, and we do it here a lot.
And I'll also throw in one example that I think is great, because people are saying AP is super expensive, and I found this to be the case. But I will also say that the price for a service plateaus as the watch becomes much more complex. Like, it's not as though a tourbillon is going to cost 5 or 6 times as much as a $1,500 Royal Oak offshore, because I once spot checked a tourbillon service cost. It was the original tourbillon automatique, the first tourbillon wristwatch with AP, which is not just a micro movement built into the case back, but it's an extremely uncommon, old, and specialized watch. They said it would have to go to the restoration shop. We're talking 1986 vintage, and they quoted me $4,000.
Yeah, there is a difference. There was a story out in probably last 6 months, if not a year ago now, about a vintage Calatrava, Patek Calatrava, that went to Switzerland, and it was a reporter from New York, and I don't remember what newspaper it was or what magazine. I don't know if you remember this story or not, where they took the watch to Switzerland and actually followed it through the estimate process, and the estimate came back at like $18,000 for a 3-hand Calatrava. Oh, I did that on purpose.
There goes my Grand Memovox. You see, that service was worth every cent.
So I did. They came back. It's a very good story, and I'm trying to remember where I even saw it posted. It was in one of the magazines. It wasn't on Watch Forum, but it was actually a magazine that talked about watch servicing. And the watch had been in their family forever. But again, the value, it's probably close to the value of the watch. It was just a 3-hand gold Calatrava.
And I think the key distinction there that set that apart from everything else and created the headlining cost was that that was, strictly speaking, a restoration. In which case, often, not only do parts have to be made, but the tools to make the parts have to be made. So what you're really paying for in that case is hours on the clock.
What they do too, when you talk about restorations, if the watch goes back to AP or to Patek or even to Omega for the restorations on the real vintage watches, they have samples of the original pieces. Where the original piece may not be in the watch because they may be long gone, a spring for example, but they kept originals, and those originals are, that's what they use to either cast, to machine, to use as a template to manufacture a new part, whether it's a wheel, no matter what it is, balance staff. They're not going to use the original one because it may be the only sample left in existence from the original run, but they'll use those measurements, they'll use everything for the production of a repeat piece. Also, when you talk about factory service, like on the Patek complications, Patek's running about 27 weeks right now. When you send a watch in for them, you're going to get great service, but you're also going to be without your watch for half a year.
Yeah, and I have to say that's actually not that bad. Some questions coming up regarding my services. I serviced 5 watches, including my Duomet, back in 2015. The longest term I was without my watch in all JLC service, Fort Worth and Switzerland, was 6 months for a restoration of my Master Ultra Thin, which is my least complex watch and the cheapest watch I bought in terms of what I actually paid to acquire it. I think I want to say I paid like $5,100 for the black dial version that I had to get shipped over from Japan because that's where most of the black dials went. But then I spent $1,690 on a restoration with JLC. So complexity and price often aren't proportional. It's often parts and man hours, and that one simply required more than anything else. And I'll also add that the $910 to service my MVOX 2 and the roughly $1,500 for my perpetual calendar alarm both included a refinishing. I opted against it on the Platinum watch, but they did not charge. It was a no-cost elective option on both.
One of the things I'll talk about too, you mentioned it's man hours, but on top of man hours, it's also the skill and the ability to do it.
Yeah.
Because just because you're a watchmaker doesn't mean you can reset a perpetual calendar. You can't make the adjustments. And same thing, minute repeater, anything like that. There's different levels of watchmaking, and what you can do. And so there's very few people. I don't know how many people JLC has in the restoration department and Valley de Joux, but it's very small. They're very small houses and it's very select people. And there's really no time frame when they give them the watch to do as a restoration. They don't say you have to have this done in 10 days. It's just here's the watch, do the restoration. They worried about the bill. They build. It's the price is negotiated ahead of time.
One of the last true bastions of traditional Swiss watchmaking.
Exactly. Patek is there, in Valley de Joux and JLC. As far as the high-end restorations.
Now, in terms of another question I'm getting about my services, I had 5 watches out. They varied from roughly 7 weeks for a Reverso Duo, which was I remember it was back in less than 2 months, to the 6 months for the restoration of the Ultra Thin. Now, I serviced my Master Ultra Thin 34, simple watch but needed a restoration, so very involved. Delicate watch too to work on. Also serviced my Extreme World Alarm Tides of Time, which is both a complicated movement and a nightmare case to take apart. I serviced my Duomet chronograph, which is the caliber 380, a monster in its own right, and with the German silver movement components, very delicate. I serviced my Reverso Duo, and I serviced my MVOX, and all those watches were either delicate or complex. I felt like I got a great deal on each service. So I would absolutely service with the factory. Mike can do that kind of work to the same standard. I just feel like,
You don't
first
get
of
the
all,
paperwork.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to get upgraded with the parts. I did see one question, if you scroll up a little bit there, Tim. Where was it?
Was this?
No, it was about why does it take longer to service a watch than it does to manufacture a watch? It's a manufacturing and assembly are two different things. If you assemble the watch, you have all the parts in front and you're putting the watch together. When it goes to do a full service, you have to take that watch and you have to completely disassemble it. While you're disassembling it, you're actually taking more time because you're examining every piece as it comes apart. When I do a teardown, I'm checking end shakes as that watch comes apart. I'm checking all the pivots for wear as it comes apart. So it actually takes longer to tear a watch down and do a full service. And then you have to actually find out what you're going to replace on that watch. And then when you go to put it back together, you're also making adjustments because you're not starting with a new product. You're starting with something that, number one, somebody could have worked on in the past and you have to fix what they did. Or number two, you have to work on something that's actually changed because it's been running for the last 5-10 years. And so positions have changed, end shakes have changed. So you have to make all those adjustments. So it's a little more complex putting the watch together to do a service than it is to actually do just an assembly, a base assembly from start, in a lot of cases.
It's for the same reason that it takes, it took a Detroit automaker 4 hours to make a 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado on the assembly line. But going back to restore that car, now you have to look at every single part, and you have to restore parts that may not have aged evenly. When you build a watch, it's a standardized process. Every part is new. When you tear down a watch, you have to inspect every part to see how it's individually worn and whether it's still within spec. And that could be anything right down to the actual end shake, so the relative movement of jewels within the plates, to the condition of the hairspring. A lot changes, and so you have to go slowly.
That's one of the things too. When we took the Omega exam, they were very stringent about end shakes, and even in Switzerland, you train everything. The end shakes have to be within a specification, and if they're not, you have to be able to determine first of all if they're not. Secondly, you have to put them back in a specification. But also, when you're moving that end shake, you're also changing the orientation of two wheels. So you have to make sure you're moving everything proportionally the same, and so everything lines up correctly.
So now, continuing forward, we've got our myth busting. We're going to jump to the Rolex service interval, and this keeps coming up alongside the non-transferable warranty. It seems like these hit within, I'd say, about 18 months of each other. There is this myth going around, and it seemed to arise around the time the Rolex 5-year warranty was put in place, that Rolexes sold after July 1st, 2015 had a 10-year service interval, and we're going to rate this one false.
Yeah, I don't like 10-year service interval. I don't like saying it, just because of again, we use our lubricants. The lubricants we use, we put such fine as in small quantities of lubricants in very, very precise places. We could put a man on the moon, but we can't make a lubricant that doesn't dry out over time. Plus, no two watches wear the same. It's like two cars coming off the assembly line. You could have two different service histories from identical cars that came off next to each other off the assembly line. There's no telling how the one watch is going to run compared to another watch. The other thing is, how are you maintaining the watch? Do you keep your watch in a winder? If you do, that watch is going to wear out a hell of a lot faster than somebody that wears it 2-3 days a week. It's actually better for that watch to wind down and relax, for all the lubricants, all the pressure, just to come off of it for a while, and then when you wind it back up, for everything to come back together. So again, I'm not a fan of winders unless we're talking about complex calendars. So a lot of it depends on how you actually use the watch, where you live, what kind of temperature conditions you're subjecting the watch to. So there's a lot of variables. 10-year warranty. It's tough. If there's a 10-year service interval, there'd be a 10-year warranty.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The 5-year Rolex warranty is on paper and confirmed. The 10-year service interval has only ever been a rumor. So again, if you go to Rolex and you say, my watch broke down after 8 years of relentless use, and it should be within,
for a service.
Yeah, it's not like, because one thing contradicts the other. Either you're entitled to a warranty claim out to the official 10-year service interval, or the warranty's 5 years and the service interval is 5 years. Because you can't somehow have a 10-year service interval blessed by the factory, a failed watch, and then not have a legitimate warranty claim. Legally, that doesn't make sense.
Exactly. When I first started working on watches, it was 3 to 5 year service interval. Again, we were using a blend of oils. Now that everything's full synthetic, once a watch is serviced, we're 5 to 7 years now. If that watch is everything went together right. The other thing you're looking at too is when you service a watch, I've talked about this, there's certain parts that we have to change, and we'll automatically change those because even though that watch it might be in for its first service, it could be 7 years old, it could be 10 years old, there's parts in there that have been working hard for the last 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
So are they going to last another 10 years? What's the next service going to be? Are you going to have that watch service another 5 years? You're going to sell that watch? Is it going to go another 10 years? So we have to anticipate, are those parts going to actually last for the same life of that watch?
So now it's also important to note, because we're riffing on Rolex right now, this is a great rumor because the answer is actually kind of cool. But the Domino's Pizza Rolex watches, you've seen them since at least the 5500 series Air King in the early 1980s. First, Domino's Pizza insignia on the dial itself, and later as a little molded metal emblem on the links of the bracelet. But there's a rumor that these are aftermarket modifications commissioned by Domino's. No, they're made by Rolex. This rumor that they're aftermarket is false. And
yeah, absolutely. I've seen so many of those. We had one recently in here that actually has it down at the bottom lug. I've seen them. I've seen more of them actually printed on the dial. And you talk about different brands. So many people have had. With Rolex, they've commissioned Chevy's another one.
Yeah.
The bow tie dial.
That's for real.
The bow tie dial is absolutely stunning. I actually think we have one here on consignment.
We do, actually. It was an anniversary piece for Chevrolet during the 1980s. But the vast majority of the dials you see with corporate logos on them are fake. I mean, when it comes to Rolex factory dial modification, you've pretty much got the bow tie Chevy, you've got Domino's, and then you've got a bunch of Middle Eastern royal families
a lot of Middle Eastern
that
stuff.
had the pull to make custom dials part of the program at Rolex. But for the most part, those custom dials outside that realm, that stratified realm, are going to be aftermarket, and the Domino's is a rare exception to that. Now, speaking of dials, I love this one because it flies so far beneath the radar.
Yeah, I'm just reading that now.
And it's on the moving threshold of Rolex vintage, which I think now encompasses the late 80s. It's moving forward as we stride forth into the 21st century. But the rumor is that Rolex built a porcelain dial Cosmograph Daytona with the Zenith movement after 1988. And this rumor is true. The porcelain dial Daytona is real. It was an R-Series watch. It was built with the Zenith caliber. They're white dials, and you're looking at them because, first of all, they're going to be R-serials. Second, they're going to have the 200-unit calibrated traditional spec tachymetric scale that later increased. Subsequently, so did the dial change from the floating Cosmograph, which encompasses all porcelain dials, to the more compact arrangements, the 4 subsequent iterations of that Zenith caliber dial. But there are, by some estimates, anywhere between 800 and 2,500 porcelain dial Rolex 16520s and 16528s in yellow gold. They're out there, they're real, they're very early. You want to look for the trifecta of the 200-unit 200-unit tachymetric scale, the bracelet that doesn't have the straight-through polish or the clamshell closure. It's a snap bracelet. And you want to look for the floating Cosmograph with an R serial number. Get all that together, and it's worth having the watch checked for a porcelain dial.
Interesting. I did see one other question come in when we're talking about service.
Yeah.
Quartz watches. Do quartz watches have to be serviced? Yes, we treat them differently. We test, mechanical watches are tested for amplitude, and that tells us the condition of the lubricants, that and a visual inspection. It'll tell us the condition of the lubricants, and if the dry lubricants are actually put in a drain on the release of power from the mainspring. So that's what we do on the mechanical watches. On quartz watches, we test them for consumption, and it's how much power is being drawn. And quartz watches are all different. They all run at a different consumption depending on the gear train. The oils used in a quartz watch are not there for lubrication because there's essentially no friction, but they're there as a dampener. So as that quartz watch is stepping, you don't want it to chatter. So we put lubricant in there. It's a different lubricant than used in mechanical watches, and it acts as, like I said, it's a bumper just to take up the shock of the quartz stepping. So yes, quartz watches do have to be serviced. We're talking about high-end quartz watches. Do have to be serviced. There's really no interval. We'll change a battery, and when we change the battery, we take the battery out. We test the consumption of that. If it's over a certain consumption, again, depending on the quartz watch, then we'll go ahead and we'll recommend a service on that, because what you'll see is if you don't have that watch service, it'll start eating batteries at a quicker rate.
So, quick question. I want to definitely try to hit the live chat. Federico's joined us. Welcome, Federico. Some questions coming in about the Vacheron Constantin Overseas. Let me see if I can find the question. This comment thread moves so fast, you guys. You field a lot of good questions, and I just have to try to find them. But in general, the Vacheron Constantin Overseas, what I can say is educate yourself about the 3 distinct generations of the watch, because the one made from 1996 to 2003 is a very different watch than the one that came after. It's more delicate, it's more dress-oriented. The calibers are likewise more delicate. Generally, Girard-Perregaux in the automatic, Frédéric Piguet chronograph caliber in the chronograph, smaller cases, more complex bracelets. The Generation 2 is the one that most people consider the Overseas, from 2004 to 2015, and that one, you know, you'll see JLC movements, the Frédéric Piguet chronograph stuck around, but the watches are also much bigger at 42 millimeters versus 37. They're more robust, the bracelets are more solid, they're more wearable and usable. And then there's the Generation 3 watch, which is a huge step up in price and complexity, but you also get the display case back, quick change lugs, accessory bracelets and straps, and a lot of added value content. But mind the aesthetics. Some people don't like the look specifically of the chronograph of the Generation 3 as much as they like the Gen 2.
Yeah, I've seen the Gen 2 just in a 3-hand version. I haven't seen the chronograph yet.
So, questions? We're going to get to them, guys. We're definitely not going to leave you hanging, but we've got some general watch myths that we want to bust, starting with the 30-meter water resistant. People do the math and they realize, well, this is around 100 feet. That should be plenty of margin for swimming. I'm never going to go that deep.
Depends on first of all, it depends on the condition of your seals. And if your watch is over 2 or 3 years old, you should have the watch checked, because it's not so much the pressure, because as the pressure increases, the watch is going to tighten up. But when we test watches, we also test them in a vacuum, which tries to pull the watch apart. And the reason the vacuum is important, not because you're going up into space, but when you do a backstroke. Every time you do a backstroke when you're in a pool, you're actually putting that watch into a vacuum. And if there's any kind of leaks in that case, anything, any kind of deterioration in the seals, it's going to suck water in. So the vacuum test is very, very important. We do that in all our watches. Again, it's no matter how old the watch is, it should always be, or what kind of watch it is, it should be checked. The seal should be checked every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. When Mike talks about the vacuum test, there are 2 ways that water can intrude into your watch if the crown is properly secured. One is the offensive pressure, but there's also the low pressure intrusion. Sometimes the addition of pressure will actually restore hermeticity to a watch. So a watch may actually hold up okay 10 feet underwater, but when you're just damping it in the, you're dampening it at the surface.
Casual water, they call it.
Yeah. That can allow water to simply seep in if it's not secure. 30 meters is a static test, and it's a tame one. And I don't know of any watch manufacturer that endorses swimming or serious aquatics with a 3 ATM 30-meter watch. Consider that splash only. Now, the other thing that we want to focus on tonight is a question that keeps coming up, because we always talk about service, but we don't talk about refinishing as much as we should. But platinum specifically puzzles folks. And there's a rumor that when you refinish platinum, you don't remove metal. And we're going to rate this one between the spectrum of false and true, sorta. Mike, could you explain?
It doesn't, platinum, when you go to refinish it, it doesn't, you'll see scratches in platinum. Platinum is very hard, so it takes more to scratch it. When you do a scratch in platinum, though, what happens when we polish it, it actually moves the metal back into where it used to be. So on gold, we're definitely taking layers off. Okay, it's nothing you're going to be able to weigh and see a difference once the watch is polished or not polished. You'll see it more on the edges, and a professional polisher will keep those sharp edges. We will see, grooves and stuff from previous polishings where the grooves are gone, and especially in the lugs or on the end of the bracelets, you lose those sharp edges, and that's one thing we really try to guard against. In platinum, platinum's treated differently. It's a very hard metal. So again, when you're polishing it, you're actually moving the metal and you're putting it, you're kind of molding it back to where it used to be.
If you want to imagine it like this, imagine you're a kid and there's a cake, and the cake is covered with gorgeous icing, and you just drag your finger along the top of that. Okay, well, you've created a channel, but you've already displaced some of the icing to the side. So while you've removed some, it's also possible, if you wanted to refinish the cake, to push some of that displaced icing back in. And that's kind of like refinishing platinum. You're going to lose some of the material because first, drawing something along the watch and scratching, it's going to remove some material to begin with, but also because just leveling the metal always removes material by virtue of the simple friction. Because of the malleability of platinum, this is the same reason why it wears out tools, because it is so prone to change forms, move, basically be displaced like Play-Doh or icing. You can sort of return the platinum to the channel and flatten it out without completely just leveling it.
Right. You don't have to take everything else down. If you look at if you visualize a groove, and to get to the bottom of that groove, you have to take all this away to get to that groove. So in platinum, it's not like that. You can actually just close the gap in it. One other thing I'll talk about too, besides platinum, is ceramic. We always get a lot of questions on ceramic. It's being used more and more.
Yeah.
Now on bracelets too. Ceramic it's very, very difficult to scratch it. I'm not going to say it won't scratch. It's very difficult. If you brush up against something with ceramic, you're essentially, whatever you're hitting, you scratched it, and it's leaving a deposit on the watch.
Yeah. And
we can remove that. It's one of the things, when I was at Bulova, that's one of the things we did. We refinished ceramic by actually taking off what was scratched onto the ceramic. So it's kind of like a reverse. It's not, you won't see a gouge or anything, you'll see a mark on it or a scuff. Those actually come off. Yeah. And that goes for different ceramic, white ceramic too.
And it's worth mentioning that if you can imagine drawing on a ceramic case with a pencil and some of the graphite comes off onto the case, that's how ceramic also treats metal and drywall.
Right.
So a lot of times you might think you've scratched your ceramic. What you've actually just done is you've removed some of the material of whatever you touched because the ceramic is so hard. So there's a deposit on the case, not a scratch in the case. And a lot of times you can just take that out with a pencil eraser.
Yeah, we use something a little stiffer than a pencil eraser. It's actually a metal impregnated. But the thing is, if we do one part of the watch, we have to do that entire area to make it all uniform. Otherwise, you get a little, not a discoloration, but you'll get a different reflection just because of the finish that's left on it.
Now we've got some more myths here, and this is one I love because it's near and dear to my heart because I'm an advocate of high-end quartz.
So am I.
Now, this is the myth. Quartz calibers are disposable by nature and definition, and we're rating this one a thunderous false.
Yes.
I mean, let's start with the most basic. Rolex caliber 5035 and 5055, the oyster quartz. Since 1977, those first oyster quartzes, we still see them in service.
Yeah, they're beautiful watches. They are extremely expensive to service now because of the price of the motor. And when I say the motor, it's an actual hairspring with an escapement. And the way that quartz works different than other quartzes where it's not a driven motor where a circuit tells it go ahead and step and it actually throws it. The way the oyster quartz works, it actually drives. It drives back and forth.
It has a Swiss lever escapement.
It has an escape wheel. Yeah. And it actually drives back and forth with the balance. And they're beautiful to watch. They're a dead second. They're adjustable, which means they're trimmable. They're absolutely beautiful movements. Another thing besides the quartz, if you look at the Breitlings, any of the Breitlings, I believe it's after 1984, when they went to super quartz.
Right about, they actually started using the ETA, I want to say caliber like 56, I believe, and then a little bit later they went to the thermocompensator.
Yeah, the thermocompensator is the super quartz. Now Omega played with it before. They had a model that actually has a compensator. It's a thermal compensator which takes a temperature reading every 15 seconds, 30 seconds, because the temperature reading is the only variable in the quartz circuit that is going to tell it to run faster or slower. So it's set at a certain temperature. What the super quartz does and what Omega did was they actually took a temperature reading and it would vary. Okay, your watch, we're down 10 degrees, the watch is going to run a little faster, let's go ahead and trim it down. So the watch is constantly regulating itself, and that's why they're getting the incredible numbers they're getting off the super quartz. But they're also a lot more expensive to service, and parts are just outrageous. That circuit itself is hundreds of dollars as compared to a $25 or $30 circuit for a regular 955.
Yeah, consider it like the balance in a chronometer.
Way different.
Yeah, way different, but in terms of price, that's going to be the big piece. Now, the other thing that's important to note is that, it doesn't just have to be the Rolex oyster quartz calibers. They're well known, but the original Breitling Aerospace from the middle of the 80s, we still see that caliber 56. It's like an ETA 988 base.
Great movement.
It keeps coming in. And these are watches that, trade sometimes for a few $100s. Lifetime serviceable, decades-long service life. and they have to be serviced and lubricated and cleaned and returned to service by a watchmaker.
Yeah.
They're lifetime products.
Yeah, they are, absolutely.
And I'll also say this. Take a look at the Seiko Crador Aiki 1 and Aiki 2. Take a look at those 7R movements, finished to a standard that would impress Philippe Dufour, and we know this because he counseled the Seiko micro artists who make the watches. That's a quartz movement. And on that, I rest my case for quartz. Now, Mike, this is a great question because people get themselves deep into trouble with perpetual calendars. Myth, perpetual calendars. If you set them too far forward, they have to go back to the factory.
Depends. Tim?
We're going to rate this one sorta, because it's definitely the case if you have the so-called Kurt Claus perpetual calendar system and it's used by JLC and IWC, it's completely coordinated, which means everything moves in sync, day, date, moon phase, month, and year. The problem, though, is that year indicator. Now, on this watch, you can see it down in the corner. You could see it right up around 1 o'clock and 12 o'clock.
Right between March and May.
The fact that it has a year means it only moves in one direction. There are not individual pusher adjusters to fix all the registers. If I accidentally advance this thing into 2018 or even a few months ahead, it's either going to have to sit until I reach that date in reality, or a watchmaker is going to have to manually correct it, and that's going to require going back to the factory.
The way we actually do some of those here.
Yeah, we can do.
Yeah, we do them here. We have, especially on the IWC, because IWC put the quick set is actually on the crown, and a normal quick set like your calendar would be. And we do have, we'll sell the watch, and somebody will be overzealous, and they'll think they're winding the watch, and they're in quick set, and all of a sudden before they realize that they're advanced 6 months, and there's nothing they can do. I actually did one about a month ago, where it was actually 2018, 2019. He zipped it ahead a couple of years thinking it was going to come around and catch back up again, and he got into a lot of trouble. That can be reset. Basically, it's pulling the hands, it's resetting that calendar, and it's not a bad calendar to reset. This is a little more involved because of the alarm and everything else. So this is definitely a factory service. There's different annual calendars that, because of my experience with them, I know are factory service. But there's also perpetuals that I don't mind doing. So it varies. It varies on the construction. Some perpetuals are easier to fix than annual calendars.
So perhaps we should qualify this one as a perpetual calendar needs to go to a watchmaker if it's set too far ahead. That's definitely true. I will say with the Kurt Claus systems, they've been around since 1985. Sometimes you run into the opposite problem, which is one that's 15, 20 years behind. The watch hasn't run in a decade or two. Now you're talking about indexing this thing thousands and thousands of times. It might not make it through the equivalent of decades of use all in a day.
Watch, if that thing's been sitting that long, that's something we do full service on.
Yeah, especially with the JLC, because the JLC, I just mean to interject real quick. The JLC, unlike the IWC, uses a case side pusher, so it's not even like you can just start turning the crown in the adjustment position as you can on an IWC. If that JLC is 10 years behind, you're looking at between 3,600 and 4,000 pokes with a toothpick.
Yeah, it's not good for the watch either to do that. Some of the watches we talk about that, we have the annual calendars here, and they all have independent settings.
Yeah.
So they have independent correctors. So and even on the perpetuals and the Patek perpetuals, they have independent correctors. Where even if you're off with the leap year indicator, you can bring it around 4 years relatively short time.
Yeah. And I will say this: there are two systems out there. One is used by H. Moser & C, and that's the Endeavor Perpetual, and then there is Ulysse Nardin with all variants of the perpetual Ludwig system that debuted in 1996. Both of those systems are perpetual calendars that can be set backward and forward with no hazard to the movement. So neither one of those needs to go back in the year 2100. And that is the year that every perpetual calendar not made by them has to be corrected.
One of the funny things too, you talk about IWC and how they sell the little capsule.
Yeah, century slide.
The century slides. So it's kind of funny about that is because it's not like this watch is going to run until you have to install that. It's not going to last that long between services.
Exactly.
You're not going 100 years between service.
That's almost like the century egg. Will you still be able to eat it in 100 years? Yeah. No, you'll be dead. Yeah. So
But they're cool.
They are cool.
They're sealed in wax.
Those are cool too. So question from Mikkel Johnston, who's asking, what about the Zenith annual calendar? That system was designed by Ludwig Oxlin. It has very few moving parts. It's very easy to set. It's very robust in all of its forms. You'll have no problems with that. Again, you can just roll it around because it's an annual calendar system that makes no distinction between years, just distinctions between months.
One thing I will say too on the IWCs with the quick set, you will notice you can't just go fast on it because every now and then it'll skip a day. Where the day and the date will get out of alignment. And if that happens, there's ways to get them back in the sync.
Yeah, it's coordinated, but it's not foolproof coordinated.
It's have a watchmaker that knows the movement, that knows what they're doing. Don't just let somebody say, hey, reset my perpetual calendar.
A question coming in from Dreamscape Pure Music. Is that a Sky Dweller on the table? And then is it a true annual calendar? Answers, yes and yes. This is a Sky Dweller. This is the white gold variant that came out after the initial 2012 debut. In my opinion, I want to say this is a 2015 novelty, this particular combination of case and strap, but in any case, this wasn't one of the initial launches, and in my opinion, it's the best looking version of this watch.
It's stunning, and when you look at that as well, the month indicator is in red. It's right here in red.
And that can also set in both directions.
Yes, and this also has the turn to adjust bezel that engages the crown.
And I actually have a how to use that one online for all you folks who bought one and then realized you don't want to read the manual.
Yeah, pull the crown out. It doesn't do anything until you engage it.
So other questions, and these are good ones because I get both of these questions and they relate to travel with watches and watch commerce. But the first is airport scanners can magnetize a watch. I'm going to rate this one a big honkin' false. I've never seen this happen.
I've seen a lot of watches magnetized. I don't know how people are magnetizing them, but it's not coming from an airport scanner.
No. I've put the watch through the machine. I've walked the watch through the scanner. Everything I could possibly have done, and we're not talking robust, anti-magnetic systems like silicon hairsprings or Parachrom blue. I'm just talking about my JLCs. I've walked them through the scanners. I've run them through the scanner in the little box. No problems at all. Second, Mike, this is great because we have two topics here. First, is it illegal to buy counterfeit watches? And then let's talk about why we call them counterfeit.
Yes,
First,
they're not fake. They're counterfeit.
Right. Like a fake watch would be like a watch made of plaster.
Yes. Yes, that's a fake watch. Anything that's copying something of high value is counterfeit.
Yeah, counterfeit is a watch that looks and operates like and emulates the real thing in a way that is either designed to deceive the onlooker or deceive the buyer. And that's the most pernicious case. Now here's the thing, buying counterfeit watches, broadly buying counterfeits in Italy and France, two important continental watch markets, especially Italy. In both cases, you're liable to a substantial fine. In France, you can actually do some jail time for buying counterfeit. So that's basically how we address that. Everywhere else, there is some tolerance for the sale of counterfeit goods. I will say one thing, there is a limit on how much you can bring into the U.S. because they assume beyond a certain point, you're looking to sell if you're bringing an inventory in.
Yeah, like so we stay away from counterfeits. Actually, any counterfeits that come in here will pretty much become our property because we don't want them back out again. We check all the watches for counterfeit. There's some very, very good ones out there. There's some exceptionally high quality counterfeit watches, and that's the scary part because a lot of times people bought that watch not knowing it's counterfeit.
Yeah, and that's the danger, the anonymous counterfeit watch that travels, and that's why you need to protect yourself, either with education or a seller you really trust when you're buying a watch. So now, this is great because if you start typing tourbillon watches in on any search engine, the suggested type will just take off. Tourbillon watches are a huge subject among enthusiasts, and it seems like you can get one from almost anybody today, right down to Memorigin and their sub $1,000 Chinese-made tourbillon, and then even less in some cases. So Mike, tourbillon watches, more accurate, true or false?
If you leave them in one position, then they're going to be more accurate. But the watch is never in one position. So the tourbillon is always rotating. So it's covering the 360 degrees every minute, unless the 30 second, depending on what the tourbillon is. No, they're not more accurate. Actually, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, the JLC non-tourbillon actually won the timing.
We've actually seen that since 2009, there is a modern chronometry trial. It's not quite the observatory shootouts involving hundreds of brands that we knew in the 19th and 20th centuries, but since 2009, the Horology Museum of Loloc, Switzerland, has overseen the Concorde chronometry. And although JLC did win with a tourbillon the first year, for instance, their master tourbillon, their simple, almost industrially built tourbillon, beat the multi-axial gyro tourbillon. And in every edition since that first 2009 running of the competition, they do it every 2 years. Tissot with an ETA 2824 has been right up in the top 2 or 3 watches.
Yeah, it depends on how the watch is adjusted. We can make any watch run in chronometer specs. I pulled a Delta 0.5 today on a watch, and it's just, a Delta is a split between the fastest and slowest rates in position. But again, the tourbillon, it was designed, when Breguet made the tourbillon, it was to compensate for gravity.
Imagine the pocket watch sitting in one position in the pocket, constant orientation. The tourbillon spins on its axis, and its axis is always in opposition to gravity. Now, on the wrist, Mike, the average...
We're all over the place. You know, so even if the watch is compensating for positions, it doesn't matter because we're compensating for positions as well.
Yeah, the pocket watch and the tourbillon go together like a pig in excrement. But the bottom line is that you can regulate a tourbillon in the modern era to do extraordinary things. That JLC Master Tourbillon, a relatively simple watch based on the Auto Tractor automatic, a sub $50,000 steel watch, it averaged out to something like 47 seconds of deviation per year. So you can do extraordinary things, and in the years since, Grubel Force has won the competition. I believe one year Louis Monet won with the tourbillon. Tourbillon have continued to excel, but only very carefully regulated, low-volume, specialized watches, or in the case of JLC, a computer-designed, largely machine-fabricated powerhouse from a company that had a reguleur, a specialist regulator, tinker with the thing before it went to market. Otherwise, Tissot with the 2824 getting the same results.
Yeah, it depends on how you're setting the watch up. And again, right now, tourbillons, they're beautiful to watch, they're beautiful to look at. It's a complication. It's very difficult to master, very difficult to build. So it is a complication. It's also a novelty.
Yeah, I'll also say this, they're fantastic to look at, but if you want to look at modern innovations in tourbillon technology that matter, look at the multi-axial tourbillon, and also look at watches that use differentials, that not necessarily tourbillon, but something like the Roger Dubuis Couture, with multiple escapements attached to each other by a differential, all at angular opposition such that they're always canceling each other out. That's not a tourbillon, but that's a valid system for evening out gravity-induced variation. The multi-axial tourbillon from the likes of Thomas Prescher, Gerard Perregaux, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Cabestan, and also finally, take a look at what Grubel Force is doing, because they are using differential geared tourbillon, but also that 30-degree tourbillon angle, that's the average angle of a watch on the wrist, scientifically.
Exactly.
So
they are cool, though.
They are really cool. I'm actually going to send my tourbillon to service this year with JLC. So not only will we get a sense of what that costs, and I will share that with you, but we'll also get a great sense of how it runs when it comes back.
Yeah, we'll time it before and after.
Yeah, definitely. I can tell you right now, it's approaching its service interval. It's probably the least accurate watch I've got right now. So now this is a great question because we've got 2 Patek Philippe that illustrate each concept. White gold, we all know that some versions are rhodium-plated and some versions are homogeneous. That is, you scratch them and they're white gold underneath. So I'll act as the hand model, and Mike, you just explain what happened with Patek Philippe in terms of white gold.
White gold, the original white gold actually is a yellow. So it had to be rhodium plated. The rhodium plating was harder, so it was more scratch resistant. It held up better, but it was bright white. It was like a mirror. It just looked beautiful. Anytime you refinish it, though, you have to remove all of it. You have to remove all the rhodium plating and then replate the watch. That goes for the bracelet, the screws, every component of it. Then a few years ago, they came out with what they call gray gold. And it's what Rolex uses now, it's what Patek uses, and a lot of manufacturers use it now, where it's a little bit of an off color. Not yellow, though. It does not have the yellow that when you polish a rhodium-plated watch, you're going to see a very, very hazy yellow color to it before it's rhodium-plated. Gray gold is probably just a little more silver to it than gold.
It's probably a little bit closer. It's a little bit closer to steel than rhodium.
Yeah, it's not as white as a rhodium-plated white gold. That's the difference, and that's how you see the difference. Again, I love the gray gold because you don't have to plate it, but there's nothing that looks as good as a rhodium-plated piece.
Yeah, and it's important to note that there is a pretty widely agreed changeover date for Patek Philippe watches. 2006 is believed to be the first year that Patek built its white gold watches with a homogeneous gray gold alloy, so you could scratch it and not see a milky yellow underneath. If you want to know what this milky yellow look is like, take a look at a white gold bezeled Rolex from the 70s before they went to homogeneous gold. I say this because there are a lot of them out there. So they're a great example. When they're worn down, they're milky yellow underneath.
Well, one of the things too I'll point out is look at a white gold wedding ring.
Yeah.
Take off a white gold wedding ring and look at the inside of it, and you're going to see the rhodium is all gone, and that's the color of the gold. It's almost going to look yellow. It's going to be it's not going to be yellow gold, but it's going to have a pale yellow to it, and that's the difference. That's probably the easiest way to see where everybody can go look.
I've never seen this in legitimate luxury watches, but in cheaper jewelry, sometimes you will actually see that milky yellow and then nickel plated, and that's the worst of the worst, but I've never seen that on a watch. Okay, so question also about Patek Philippe. There's a rumor that Patek Philippe built a Reverso with JLC's blessing during the 1930s. This is true. It's called the Patek Philippe Reference 106. Only 8 were made, but it's important to note that when Patek Philippe was in bankruptcy, it was administered in part by the LeCoultre family. So they had a business relationship in terms of supplying parts, and so one of the administrators and actually one of the bidders against the Stearns to buy Patek Philippe out of bankruptcy was the LeCoultre family. Jacques David LeCoultre actually still controlled the company. He did until 1948, and although he lost his bid to buy Patek Philippe, they did enter a licensing agreement via patent exchange whereby Patek could build its own Reverso, the 106, and this caliber, I believe it was a JLC caliber inside, and 8 were made, allegedly, 4 in yellow gold, 4 in white gold. And
wow.
It's not signed JLC, it's signed Patek Philippe.
Interesting.
That's the one to get if you're going to buy just one Reverso.
8 were made. There's probably 2 sitting in the museum in Switzerland.
Terry Stern has one in each color.
Yes.
So this is a great question because it relates to our, I'm going to jump to another Patek question, but Patek Philippe was part of the Beta21 consortium. They were one of the participants in the Centre Electronique Horloger. So there's this rumor that their version of the Beta21 had special finishing on it. Mike, we've both inspected that movement. Categorically false.
Yes, false. It's just, there's nothing overtly, just.
Other than that it says the name of the brand to which it was shipped on the movement, they are the same. They were all built by the center, the CEH.
Yep.
That was the consortium that multiple Swiss brands co-sponsored, and it was also the manufacturing center. So you pop open a Rolex 5100, the original IWC Da Vinci with the Beta. You pop open a Patek Philippe. You pop open a Bucherer. Any of the companies that used this movement are going to get the same exact thing.
Yeah, no difference.
So that one is false. There is no special Patek Philippe finishing. Now this is a great one because we're dealing with copyright infringement. We actually have 2 in rapid succession. But there is this rumor that won't die. Mike, Gerald Genta, did he design the Royal Oak for Bulova before Audemars Piguet?
No.
No, he did not. We've got a picture of this monstrosity. I think, Faylene, you have the Bulova Royal Oak somewhere. This thing is an abomination, and it's a favorite of unscrupulous eBay sellers who want to claim that this is like the Area 51 suppressed alien spaceship of high horology, that it was designed for Bulova first.
That is it, and that's not it.
That's the Bulova one.
Yep.
No, it's nothing but, at best, a tribute. At best, a tribute. And it's the spiritual successor of the Hamilton Otis, which we also have a picture of. The Hamilton Otis, or as it's not known, the Reverso. This is a watch that was built from 1938 to 1939 for the US market only. Probably because it would have been confiscated the second it landed on the continent. But if you want a great example of two American brands that lovingly referenced their Swiss equivalents.
What's funny about that is, too, that was the flip side of it. Because earlier than that, the Swiss were actually copying American pocket watches. And then everything kind of flipped, after the 1930s.
Yeah.
Everything transferred over.
And it was actually kind of interesting because there was an attempt to protect the American watch that was in the middle of the market. So the idea that the mid-market watch, not the very low Rosskopf pin lever movements, and not the high horology stuff, but U.S. tariffs were configured so that you had to, send an unadjusted movement to the U.S. Tariffs were placed on fully cased up, fully assembled watches in that mid-price range. That's why you see those LeCoultre-style watches. They came over to the U.S. as knockdown kits with hands and dials and movements, and then they were cased by Star Watch or De Vincenzo and Arienti. That's why you see those cases cased and timed in the U.S. And ultimately, those tariffs killed the U.S. watch industry because the Swiss took the high end and the low end, and then the Japanese took the low.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen so many of those watches at Star Watch Case Company, too.
So great old American watchmaking folklore. By the way, if you can find that Hamilton Otis today, it's a pretty collectible piece. The Bulova Royal Oak, no.
Not so much.
So guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate all your comments, your questions. Again, we're going to do a pure Q&A this Friday. Josh Thanos will be back. I'm also going to have Brian Goffberg on, and he can answer everything you ever wanted to ask an authorized dealer, but were afraid to. So Brian Goffberg coming on, I believe, this Friday, and Josh is going to be back on Monday. So that's our schedule for the week. I want to thank Mike for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. Had a lot of fun again.
Remember, this guy can service your perpetual calendar.
Not all of them, but some of
them. So guys, thank you so much. I'm Tim. He's Mike. She's Faylene. This is Watch You Want, and thanks for logging on.
Have a good night.